Greetings, family, and welcome to the Art of Rising. Thank you for tapping in. And as always, we have some wonderful, wonderful people coming up on the show. And we have this amazing brother. He's an author. And as you can imagine, we're always impressed with writing and what that entails and how to get there. So, the Art of Rising is all about giving you the codes to life. That way, it can help you on your journey. So I'll just welcome Mr. Michael Pickard. Thank you so much, brother, for being on the show. Appreciate you.
It's my pleasure.
Thank you. Thank you for taking the time. And I was going over your bio and looking at all the books that you've written. And why don't you just tell us your name and Michael Pickard, of course, but tell us where you live and what are you doing with yourself these days?
Uh, so you might say I'm in a Midwest rut. I was born, raised, and educated in the Chicagoland area. Uh, Went to college locally. Uh, I've worked three different careers, uh, all around Chicago. Uh, at the moment, I am an author. I work on mostly novels, the occasional short story. Uh, and as a hobby, I'm working on a board game.
Mm. Wow, that's much needed these days because with the electronics and cell phone, I have two young kids in the house. I have a 7 and a 9-year-old, and oh my God, they're like glued to the phone. But it's like a constant battle. I try not to allow them to be with the phone, uh, even TV during the week. Try my best, really, because it's too much. But
I,
board games, I love it.
I have a grandson who's 11, and I think the phones and tablets are glued to his hands.
Yeah. Yeah, it's like swimming upstream. You can't give into it. You can't. Just keep fighting. Keep fighting because there's a direct link to some substance abuse as humans get older in connection with cell phone use. So the electronics are no good. And then growing up, you speak about board games. That's so fascinating because growing up, man, we played everything, the game of life and Parcheesi and Trouble and oh my God, like all of them, Monopoly, those type of things.
Yeah,
Why don't you tell us a little bit about the board game you're working on?
sure. So back when COVID was depressing everyone, uh, I had a dream. Most of my story ideas either come from dreams or hot showers. Uh,
Mhm.
but I had a dream about uh, a game that had pieces that moved around the board. I could picture the board, but I didn't know what the rules for the game were. So I went to my grandson Lucas and I said, "You play a lot of games. Uh, Here's what the piece looks like. Here's what the board looks like. Um, why don't you tell me what kind of rules we ought to have?" And so I took notes for about a half an hour when he told me all of the rules for all of the games that he had ever played. I went home, took me a couple of weeks, and I wrote using JavaScript a graphic board game. The game is called Alien Survival, and I applied the rules that he gave me. And I went back and said, "Okay, let's play this." And he beat me 3 out of 3 games. And I watched how he played. And it wasn't just that he knew the rules, it was that he knew how to circumvent the rules. I
Mm.
went, okay. So I toughened the rules up, did some debugging, if you will,
Mm.
uh, and brought it back. And he won 3 out of 3 games. I went, this is crazy. So I talked to someone who was a board game developer, and he read the rule book and he said, at the end of your game, it's just kind of a wait them out. Whoever is ahead uh, can just wait, uh, and then they'll win. So it's like a basketball
Mm.
game, right? If you're ahead by 5, you just want to run out the clock.
Mm.
So he said, you really need to liven it up, including the end of the game. So it took me a long time, But I finally figured out that if the board was an opponent, then the board could circumvent anybody's uh, weighted out strategy. So I implemented the board as an adversary, and I asked them to play me 3 more games, and we got together, and I won 2 out of 3. He was shocked that the board was throwing these hazards in his way. Uh, and so I figured, okay, well, now the game is balanced. Well, last year, I bought a 3D printer. And the very first thing that I decided to do was take this flat game on a computer screen and make it 3D and make it a board game. So I printed all the pieces, the board, all the accessories, and I've been going to meetup groups, showing them the game, playing the game with them, and getting their feedback on what would make the board game better. And the last time I met with some folks, by the way, these folks always meet at pizza places. I don't know why. If there's a board game critique group, it meets at a pizza place. So I got some really deep feedback that's causing me to have to rethink the essentials. And that was good because I love getting feedback as an author. So getting feedback as a board game developer from people who know how to build board games was really valuable. So I'm in the middle of trying to figure out, and the good news is that all the pieces on the board, they're all fine. I just have to get the rules right.
Very nice. That's great. And super exciting too, man. Do you have children of your own?
So I have a grown-up daughter named Samantha, and she has gifted me 3 lovely and brilliant grandchildren. Madison is about to go to college. Lucas is about to be 12, and Kayla is 7.
Interesting. Fascinating. Wow. That's beautiful. Kids, I mean, there's no comparison with kids. I like to compare it or use the analogy of like looking at a flower, and you get to see like the petals coming out in real time. You see the colors pop, and it's like, oh, this is amazing. It's like more than what anybody can explain. It's ineffable,
I tell them that they are walking calendars because every time I see them, they've grown up a little bit. They talk more grown up. They have more grown up opinions and attitudes. They can process the world better. And as I watch that, I know time is passing.
Right. Walking calendars. I had someone tell me that too. One of my teachers said, one of the reasons your mother probably doesn't really care for you is because she sees you all the time. and she could see the clock ticking in you.
That can be painful.
Yep. Definitely. So one of the things that fascinated me about you is the writing, right? Writing of these books. I was always fascinated with people who wrote books. As a kid growing up, I looked at books and I saw all of these pages with all these words. And I was like, who did this? How can somebody do this? So as growing into an adult, and I'm still fascinated with the whole process of writing and the discipline behind it, and then the moving things around. I've done quite a bit of writing myself, and I'm the type of person that if I write you a letter, which nobody writes letters anymore, but I do write them occasionally, I'll write like 10 pages, 15, like, or more. Like I just keep going, like my thoughts, and I journal every day, and I'm doing the artist way, if you know this book as well. But you told me offline that most of your books have to do with sci-fi.
Well,
correct?
so the first 9 were science fiction. Science fiction is a very comfortable genre for me. I have a technical background. That was my first career doing software. Uh, so there's a good bit of my brain that is uh, compliant to logical thinking, like a computer programmer would have to be. Uh, and when my daughter was about 11 or 12, she was going to go off to overnight camp for the first time. And she came to me and she said, "Daddy, I want you to write me a letter every day." Uh, and so it wasn't a big surprise. I knew that parents wrote letters to kids. Um, but I'm a bit of an overachiever, and I didn't want to just write something boring, what I had for breakfast or what I did all day. So I decided that I would write her a story. These days, I plan my novels, but back then, I was what is called a pantser. I would write from the seat of my pants. And she was going to be gone a week, so I sat down and blank screen, and I wrote a chapter, printed it out under a pseudonym, and I sent her that chapter with a cover letter that said, "You've been chosen to pre-read this book that's coming out." Yeah, so that was the hypothesis for the letter. And so I sent her 7 letters, and I was writing every day to get those done. And she came home, and I said, "I'm just curious, did you enjoy them?" She said, "Oh, yeah, and so did everyone else in my cabin." So suddenly I didn't have an audience of one. I had an audience of maybe a dozen. Summer's over. She goes back to school. I stop writing. And then for the next 3 years, she asks me to pick up where I left off in the story. And so I'm accumulating chapters, and now I'm having to think about plot and thinking ahead. And when we were all done, I had the basis for my very first novel. So I gathered all the chapters up, did a significant edit on them, and then self-published with a company called Ex Libris, who used to be out in Princeton, New Jersey. They're now part of a multi-headed conglomerate out of Indiana. And people had been asking me for copies of these things, and I was printing them out on my laser printer at home. This way I could point them to Ex Libris and say, "If you really want a copy of the book, it's available. You can buy it there." I was selling them literally out of my trunk.
Nice.
And I went to a family reunion in Wisconsin on my wife's side of the family. I sold a copy to one of her cousins, and he sat out by the pool and he's reading it. And he gets, I don't know, 50, 60 pages into it. And he comes to me and he says, "Why was Gurfnit," and that's the name of the alien, "why was Gurfnit chosen to come to Earth and go to overnight camp?" And no one had ever asked that question before. So 90,000 words later, I had the answer in the form of a prequel that described how Gurfnit was born, how Gurfnit was chosen to come to Earth and learn about Earthlings' special abilities. And once the books showed up with my name in gold leaf embossed on the edge, on the spine, and I could smell the printer ink and I could see my words between the front and back covers, I got goosebumps. I wanted to keep doing that, and so I have.
That's beautiful. Wow, that is amazing. For most people or lots of people, they're doing a lot of nothing. Like they go to work and they go, "Oh man, I did so much. Let me sit down and binge watch Netflix." And I mean that's not what I'm about. I don't watch TV. I don't watch movies. I couldn't tell you the latest movie. What I'm doing is I'm building this. I'm building. We're the Omziel Healing Sanctuary, and we have a podcast, and the podcast is this one, The Art of Rising. So, and we do many things here too. One of the things is a cold plunge with breath work. And similar like you, I had a dream also. I had a dream with the person who has made this healing modality famous. I wasn't going around thinking about him or any of the breath work with the ice, none of that, nothing, no. It just came to me like that. And then like 9 months later, I started getting these emails that he was going to be at a location teaching, and it was a big event, and I kind of hesitated, but and then I finally went, and then I met an instructor, and then he took me under his wing, and he taught me lots of things about breath work and about cold exposure. But it's all about the mind. That's what we're doing here. That's what this is about. Like, I'm here picking your brain, trying to find out, like, why would you write these books and these sci-fi, and how did you put them together and stuff like that. And by the way, your last name is Picard. Are you related to the captain by any chance?
Well, for some reason, in the future, his family line in France dropped the K. Uh, uh, but
He just got the right, right.
when I worked at Apple, my nickname was Captain.
Okay,
So
all right. Yep.
the other employees who were young enough to be my children uh, uh, would say, "Oh, I can't solve this problem. We'll ask the captain to come over, and he'll know the answer."
That's right. That's right. I'm a huge sci-fi, huge. Like, I'm 56, so when I was coming up, Star Trek was just getting popular. Like, the reruns were, on that show that nobody liked. They canceled it. It wasn't gonna do good, and wow, what was the gentleman's name who wrote the Star? No,
Roddenberry.
Gene Rottenberry. Yeah. Some people say he was tapped in, like he was getting download information from somewhere, because like everything, like the cell phone, the doors open, like oh my God, he had like so many things. Like, somebody was feeding him information either from here or somewhere else. So um, I'm a huge sci-fi fan. So tell me about the books. Like, when you do write a book, what is the process now that you have? Is it like, I don't know,
Yeah.
superstition, or you make notes, or
Well. So it starts with an idea, uh, and I have lots of ideas. But the important thing for me is to select an idea where uh, it resonates in my head and my heart.
Mm,
Uh, so why both places? Well, writing a book isn't easy. I get a book out a year, but it takes me 2 years from idea until it hits the market. So I'm always overlapping projects. 2 years is a long time to work on something.
yep.
And if you don't have a passion for the project, you'll give it up. So I could have a great idea in my head, but if my heart isn't in it, then I won't stick with it. So I need to believe that the story that I'm writing, in some sense, needs to be told, needs to be shared.
Mm,
And if I believe that in my heart, then I can stick with it for 2 years.
mm. That makes the books even more juicier, because your heart is in it. Like, talk about like determination, and then there's passion behind it too.
Yeah.
You know?
The goal for any of my books is threefold. I want to entertain, certainly. So I want someone who's going to spend their hard earned money on a book to be entertained after they read it or while they're reading it.
Mhm.
Second, I want to inform the reader. So all of my books have, uh, it's hard to say the word, facts in them, um, but either real science or uh, what most people would consider reality, things they might not know. So there's a bit of informing.
Mhm.
I think the gold star of the three is giving readers the opportunity to think deeper about the themes in the novels.
Mm.
It would be perfect if someone came up to me and said, Mike, I read your latest book, and when I closed the cover, for 30 seconds, for a minute, I just thought about what you were trying to get to in the book. For me, that would be a home run because they internalized it. They made it part of themselves, even for 30 seconds. You try to think about something for 30 seconds. 30 seconds is a long time.
Yeah.
So if I can impact someone's life that way, then I feel successful.
That's amazing. Yeah. And then, with sci-fi or these fictional, right, books that you're writing, it just brings people into another world, right? And they get to use their imagination. So, coming up, I read a ton of comic books and collected a ton of them too. That's why I love sci-fi and all that, And I was in a comic book store buying it with a friend, but he didn't collect or read them, and he just came out and said, my friend of mine that I'm with, he said, "Man, why would you read these books? They're like for kids. There's nothing here, And then the owner of the shop said, the thing with comic books is that you get to expand your consciousness. You get to uplift anything that you would normally think about, like it would be in a higher realm. You would see the possibilities.
Yeah, I think one of the things about when I'm writing science fiction is the freedom it gives me. So I've written sci-fi books that take place on Earth. I've written sci-fi books that have taken place strictly on another planet. You have to do a lot more world building in that circumstance. And world building is difficult, and it's even harder to describe or to share the world building without dumping a bunch of information on the reader and bogging down the book. So there is an art to sprinkling the world building throughout a novel. It's maybe one of the hardest things to do. When I started doing detective fiction, it was because the last several sci-fi books I wrote had protagonists. They weren't detectives. They weren't little old ladies in a small town helping the police. But they were all characters that were trying to solve something. They were gathering clues to figure out a result. And I noticed that and I said, okay, do I have the intestinal fortitude to actually write a detective story? So I made the challenge to myself, and I started working on what turned out to be book one in this series. And as soon as I was plotting it out and putting words on paper, I realized that one of the characters was misbehaving. So you say, how can a character misbehave? They only do what you write down. If you're a writer and you're fortunate, then your characters will begin to talk to you if you know them well enough and deep enough. And one of my characters was doing things that I didn't want her to do. And as the book went on, I realized that her story was going to continue past the end of book one. So I immediately knew that I had a second book. And this is the second time that I got sucked into a trilogy, because as soon as I knew that there was a book two, I also knew there was a book three. And I understood the overall character arc for my detective, Nick Chasm, and what he was going to go through, and how everything that went wrong. It's basically a series about how he makes a mistake, and it sounds like a small mistake, but he makes a mistake in book one on the first page, and that causes all the tumult that goes on in books two and three.
Fascinating. Fascinating. Wow. You just like you get immersed into that world, and it's beautiful. And then some of the rules, especially with sci-fi you mentioned earlier, it reminds me of the anime because I do enjoy watching anime, but it has to be like a little bit more serious, not so dark, but just more serious than kiddish. Um, and one of the reasons why I enjoy watching anime is because any live action movie that you would watch, what they're telling you is that that's really happening right there. And you're like, that 50 bullets and they none of them hit him. Like, come on, no, I can't. But with anime and sci-fi, it's like all the rules are just suspended. You could do anything. He could fly and oh my god, with powers, walk through walls and have a device that does all and then explain the device in the book, like, So I love that. I love that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The you asked earlier about my process.
Hmm.
I've been refining it over the last half dozen novels. Uh, it always starts with National Novel Writing Month, which is the month of November. The goal is to dump 50,000 words out of your head into a device, computer or pad or phone, whatever you choose. And the reason I call it dump is you're not really writing something that you would share with someone else. You're
Mm.
getting thoughts down for the purpose of editing them. So no one ever sits down at National Novel Writing Month, generates 50,000 words, and then turns it in to be published. It just can't happen. There's not enough time. So I generate what I call my mountain of words, and that's trademarked. And I let it sit for the month of December. And then on January 1st, my gift to myself is I get to read all those words. And I figure out what I have that's good, and some of it's good. And I read some of the stuff that's not so good. And I identify gaps, things that I didn't realize I needed while I was in the hurry up process. And so I make a list of those things that need to be written. And then I start to carve chunks of words out into scenes and polish them up. And then those scenes become chapters, and the chapters start their journey through critique. And I have a multi-level critique process.
Mm.
One group sees the chapter with my best edits. They tell me all the things that are wrong, and God bless them. Then my sister, who is my contributing editor, she reads them after I've applied changes. So she's another filter and an important one. And then after she's seen it, it goes through a second critique group, followed by more edits, and then 2 levels of beta readers, usually about a team of 4 or 5 people who read the book front to back. And the reason that's important is everyone else has been looking at it a chapter at a time. So they don't have a good sense of continuity. And my example of broken continuity is you read a book and in chapter 3, somebody smashes up a car. When you get to chapter 17, they buy the car. Well, that's out of order. It's a blatant example, but one of my beta readers for my latest novel, Creative Deductions Strikeout, found a problem. Someone knew something in chapter 10 or 11 and wasn't told about it until chapter 23. And I went, well, she found the car crash, car purchase problem, which was pretty easily fixed. But at least 12 people hadn't found that problem. And so beta readers are worth their weight in gold. They can look at the project as a whole and give you insights that other people cannot give.
Wow, that's fascinating. And that seems to be one of the processes that myself and plenty of people that I know are looking for, right? So here you are putting some sort of process that you have and then carving out like these chunks of things, of words, and then then there's also these number of filters that you have, along with these groups of trusted people too. So this is um, sort of like a roadmap, in order to get just about anything done. Perhaps you should start on self-help books after you finish with the.
Well, I'm quick to point out that my process works for me. It may not work for another writer.
Right.
Uh, there are people that I know who uh, write a chapter at a time.
Mhm,
That's the way their mind works.
mhm,
Uh, I tried that over the last year.
mhm,
I had an idea for a project.
mhm,
Uh, the tentative title is English Doesn't Translate.
mhm,
And it's the story of a young woman in the UK who is writing detective stories, but she has a second personality in her brain.
mhm,
The second personality is her detective,
mhm, mhm,
and he's also her muse. So
mhm,
he helps her in writing her novels.
mhm,
And of course, they argue. They don't always have the same opinion, but
mhm,
the argument goes on in her head.
mhm,
And so people don't hear it, they don't see it. Once in a while, she'll slip and she'll make a comment either about what he said or an answer to what he said.
mhm,
And people around her look at her like she's nuts.
mhm,
Uh, but that one I'm writing one chapter at a time. And it's
mhm,
very frustrating because I'm up to chapter 12 and I know that the previous 11 chapters all need edits to support what I wrote in chapter 12.
mhm,
And that's something that I wouldn't want to do
mhm,
for a larger project, for one of my normal projects.
mhm.
So I'm experimenting with that, but it will probably not become my process.
Yeah, that's what I tell people too. Experiment and try different things. That's one of the things that are happening here. There's many different people that come on the show, all kinds of people who write books too, and then health enthusiasts and meditators and yoga and all kinds of But I usually tell people, when you find the person who tells you this shoe fits everybody, stay away from that guy. You know,
Yeah, it
because
probably fits nobody.
right. That's not true. It can't be true. Not every shoe fits everyone. Michael, why don't you tell me a little bit about writing and AI?
Okay. Um, so what the trade press and the general public call artificial intelligence, which I refuse to use that phrase.
Mm,
Uh, I did some research when ChatGPT bubbled up from nowhere.
mm,
Uh, I wanted to know what was going on behind the covers, right? I was a software guy for 28 and a half years. And some people would say I'm still a software guy because when I want to get away from writing, I write code. Uh, so it's comfortable and it exercises a different part of my brain.
mm,
But I wanted to understand how a piece of software could generate what seems like a meaningful response.
mm,
And so I watched some YouTube videos and I read some papers and uh, I understood it well enough to understand that it is a statistical analysis, that they take a bunch of prose, they break it up into small parts,
mm,
they figure out statistically what parts uh, might follow other parts.
mhm,
And it's a correlation. That's all it is.
mm, mhm.
Uh, I confirmed that word with my wife 2 days ago.
Good.
Uh, and so if you ask, well, where's the intelligence in that? The
Mm,
answer is there is none.
right,
There's
right.
just mathematical formulas.
Mm-hmm.
And the more data they aggregate that they have to break up into pieces and bash up against other data, that's what's taking all of the computing horsepower
Mm-hmm.
for what I view as a really lame process.
Mm-hmm.
If you, I tried using some of these tools, uh, and I would ask questions. So you gave me an answer. Can you tell me how you got to that answer? And no chat GPT ever said, well, I figured out this and I figured out that and I figured out this. So here's the logical sequence I went through.
Right.
The fact is there is no logical sequence.
Mm-hmm.
And they admit that they can't say where a particular item came from. I think some of them have gotten better, but most of them can't tell you where they got the raw material from. And they certainly can't tell you how they got from your prompt to their answer. So back in the old days when I was in college, there was a program called ELIZA. And ELIZA was written in either Fortran or BASIC. And it pretended to be a therapist. And so you sat down and the screen would come up with a message and would say, what do you want to talk about today? And you say, well, I'm going to meet my father for lunch. And the software figured out father, and it said, tell me more about your father. There was no intelligence in that. It was just parsing and asking some stock questions as if it was a therapist. And it was rudimentary. I don't believe that the current tools are much better than that. Bigger scale, more information at hand. But in terms of semantics, the meaning of what they're advising you or answering you, it's absent. There is no knowledge there. They're just putting words on the screen that seem to go together.
Right. Correlation. Interesting.
Yeah.
Interesting.
And I believe in my heart of hearts that AI built on these feeble tools are a bubble that will burst. Unfortunately, it's going to take one of two things. Either people are going to have to die based on the results of one of these systems, and then there'll be a hue and cry of, why are we depending on these things? The other is that some business goes all in and runs their business on AI, and the decisions or the suggestions that are made are so terrible that the business fails. And the stockholders say, you guys are out of your mind.
Right.
But it's going to take something big for the bubble to burst. But I'm predicting here on your show, the bubble will burst.
Wow. Here you have it, ladies and gentlemen. You heard it from Michael Pickard, the captain. You hear these crazy stories about, hey, I wrote a book with AI, and then I started investigating it, and it's like, it's not as simple as they're saying like that.
No, I tried I tried an experiment. So I had a novel that was on the market. It's called Forward and Back. Every science fiction author needs to write a time travel novel. So I wrote my time travel novel. It's my sister's favorite book of mine. And people were saying, well, AI will displace writers. Okay, so let's try it. So I sat down at 3 different chat GPTs, and I gave them the same premise, the setup for the first scene of chapter 1. It has to happen in the middle of the night. There's a wife who's pregnant. There's a guy who has an important meeting the next morning. And she's going to kick him and wake him up. Write the scene. And the results I got were dry. There was no humor. There was no empathy. The characters were two-dimensional. They got facts wrong. After they got it right, that it was middle of the night, they would come back and say the sun was rising.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I would type in, I told you that it's at night. Why don't you try again?
Mm,
Uh, it took over half an hour
mm,
to generate, for one
mm,
of them to generate a scene. And when I read it, it was completely subpar. I would not accept it
right.
as a replacement for what I wrote. So I'm
Right.
not worried that
Mm,
the current
right.
technology is going to displace me. Absolutely
Mm,
not.
right. I use it, and I've used it in the business also. And we have a newsletter that goes out, weekly or biweekly and stuff. And I put in some ideas and say, hey, give me about 200 words or 300 and let me see what you come up with, and then it comes up with this really cool stuff, and then I read it and I'm like, that's cold. Like, that doesn't even sound like I wouldn't put that. I'll use some of it. That's
Yeah.
true, because it sounds catchy and all that, but I wouldn't. It's cold. It doesn't sound like me or anyone for that matter. It sounds like what it is, some just ideas being put together.
I have used ChatGPT as Google on steroids. So instead of doing a bunch of searches, uh,
Right.
I will ask a
That
ChatGPT engine, tell me about this. And then I'll go to another one and ask the same prompt
mm.
and see how they differ because
Oh,
I
wow.
get different answers because I
Yeah.
don't
Because
trust them, basically.
right, right,
The
right.
one thing that I have used that became part of one of my books, my grandson and I wrote a book together.
Mm,
Uh, it's called The Midnights with a
mhm,
K.
mhm, mhm,
It's three boys with superpowers because
mm,
he wanted them to have superpowers.
mm,
Uh, so one of them's a mind reader, one is extra strong, and one can become invisible.
mm,
And the three of them uh, prevent uh, money collected at an event from being stolen. So they end up being heroes.
mm,
Uh, I needed a cover for it. And so I asked one of the graphics uh, uh, programs to generate a picture of three young boys in night outfits
mm,
in a medieval setting. And it came up with a couple of choices, and one of them was spot on. One of them looked like how I pictured these three boys
mm,
uh, in armor, inside of a turret in a castle,
mhm,
and so I used that as the cover
mm,
because it came out perfect, and I
mm,
gave attribution uh, as Amazon demands
mm,
uh, that the cover was generated
mm.
by what I call synthetic intelligence. Uh,
Okay.
and I love that cover. And I
Mm,
couldn't have drawn it.
mm,
And
mm,
uh, I guess they probably could have paid someone to draw it, but I don't think they would have come up with as good a cover.
mm. Wow.
I think
That's
that
good.
cover. I think the cover's perfect.
Yeah, there's something to be said about this thing that they're giving us, right? Because you would think about why would they give us this amazing, powerful tool? It's because it's old, and the government doesn't want it anymore. That's why. Anything that we get is right. Same with the internet, right? It was a government,
Yeah,
military thing and stuff like that.
yeah. I think that the people who are turning the knobs and throwing the levers on this technology uh, are happy to acclimate normal citizens by
Mhm,
giving it away
mhm,
so that their real customers, businesses
mhm.
who will pay for the integration of it into their systems,
Mm,
will be comfortable in doing that. So I think it's getting people acclimated and comfortable
mhm.
so that they can get the money from where the money comes from.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I use the free one, but I have friends who do the paid one, and then I ask them if I want anything like to level up. I had a friend do like a flyer for me for an event that we're having, and it looks really nice, man. Cool, man. Colors and so creative and all that. and he sent me different ones. I was like, wow, that's great. And but then if you start noticing on the internet, all of there's a lot of pictures that look like that.
Yes.
It's because that's the style that they're giving you. It's
It,
not
it,
like unique, like
yeah, it didn't come from nowhere, and it didn't come from
right.
anyone's head.
Exactly.
Uh, it's piece parts.
Right. Okay, so we're closing up now on the time that we have. Thank you so much. But why don't you give us some advice, especially to me, because in these conversations that we have, I'm always learning and making deep connections with people. But I also too have books that are inside of me. You know, one in particular that's like nudging me. And I told you that I'm going through the book The Artist's Way by Julia um, Cameron. If you know this book,
I do not.
it's a popular one. It's about artists. Everyone is an artist, and then she gives you like certain tasks, and every day is a writing assignment too. 3 pages of longhand writing, just a mind dump. Just put everything out. But then there's all other task that she has you to do also. So I'm following that, and I still have this one particular idea in my head, and it's like nudging at me like, let's go, or else I'll give it to somebody else, you know. So tell me some advice, man. You know what
Sure. Well, fiction is different than nonfiction. Uh,
it's
but
a fiction, by the way.
okay. Well, for fiction stories, in no particular order, uh, it's important to do a deep dive on your characters, uh, understand them, uh, uh, not just their hair color and what their build is, and uh, even beyond their quirks.
Mhm.
But you need to know how they think. Why is that going to be important? Because as you're writing later, and their characters in a situation, you don't want to have to stop and think, okay, how will this character react in this situation? You want to know in advance uh, that when this happens, because of the kind of person they are, this is what's going to happen. Uh,
Right.
so I think that's an important starting point. Uh, you need to make sure that uh, your characters have some stakes in the story, something that they have at risk. That adds the tension uh, and gives you somebody to root for. And of
Mm.
course, if they're trying to get from beginning to some end, uh, you have to figure out what the roadblocks are going to be, what's going to get in their way. And it may be externals, uh, it may be themselves, which make an interesting story. Uh, in the Creative Deductions series, Nick Chasm, the detective, is frustrated not by the bad guys as much, but about uh, the system of the judicial system and law and order. Uh, and he's frustrated by all the rules that he has to adhere to do his job. Uh,
Mm.
and it frustrates the daylights out of him.
Mm.
Uh, and I won't tell you what he does about that. I'll let that be a
Right,
cliffhanger.
right.
Uh,
Ah, come on, Mike. I can't believe this guy. Uh,
if you buy the book in April,
right.
through Creative Deductions, strike out. You will know how Nick strikes out.
Thank you. I appreciate you. And where can people find you if they're looking for you? Besides Amazon, Michael Pickard.
Uh, I have a sparsely populated Instagram. Uh, it is Gurfnit Author. Uh, you'll find that at Instagram. You'll also find it at uh, X, which used to be Twitter. Uh, I decided not to build a website because the author page at Amazon does a fine job of putting my work out there. Uh, and I'm actually, sounds silly, and I'm too busy writing the books to write uh, additional material about my writing or about my process.
Right.
That would just be a distraction. So
Yeah, and time consuming for
yeah,
sure.
yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. Well, thank you so much again. Thank you. Thank you for coming on to the show, and let's keep in touch. Maybe a couple of months from now, we'll see where you're at, with the other books and have you on again, eh?
That'd be fine by me.
Okay. Okay. Thank you so much. A pleasure speaking with you. And why don't you stay backstage for a moment while I close up the show?
Very good.
Okay. There you have it, guys. Woo! That was wow. That was amazing. I love it. I love it. Such great, juicy information and some of the codes we're looking for too. So stay tuned, guys, for the next episode. And remember, the art of rising. Keep rising.